Okay, we're recording. My name's Andy D. We are here as a part of the Musical Family Tree Smarter Scenes series. It's all about music, business, education, professional development, education surrounding, how to better conduct your world in the music industry and musicianship, any kind of educational opportunity. We're all about that, and we call it the Smarter Scene series for the programming. Just a disclaimer, we're recording this, and it will be posted to Musical Family Tree's YouTube channel soon after we're done here, so the next couple of days. So if you want to disable your video, it's totally cool, but I'll keep everyone on mute, and we'll do Q&As at the end. But if you do have a question in the middle, feel free to raise your hand. We'll get on it. I just want to keep it as orderly as possible. So we have our kind of keynote guest here tonight is Kat Lopez, and she's in Toronto, Canada, where she is the president of her own music management agency. And we're going to be discussing with her kind of an insider's view of the world of music management, what it does, when a musician needs to start thinking about a manager, what the world of music management actually looks like, and then we'll go on and talk about some release strategies and some other things that managers do, or that Kat has done as a manager. So first of all, welcome, Kat. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. This is so exciting.
Yeah. So Kat and I met about a year ago when we both were in a kind of a musician support group started by mutual friends, kind of around the beginning of the pandemic, when musicians kind of we suddenly found ourselves not able to do what we normally do, right? So that's kind of where we met, and that's how
it would be a year later.
I know, right? And then a year later, fast forward a year later. So just some basics. How did you get into music management?
Well, that's a long story, but I'll try to be brief. I'll try
however long or brief you want to be.
So one of my cousins, so I'm originally from Nova Scotia, which is the east coast of Canada. And I used to come to Toronto in the summers, mostly for Caravana, which is a big Caribbean festival. And my cousin was a pretty big DJ and was always very heavily involved in Caravana. So I would come up and as a teenager and as a young adult and be helping with flyering and promo and getting people to the party. And then they were the first DJ crew to get signed in Canada. And then when they got signed, the belief was that it would take them to the next level, but what actually happened was the labels didn't really understand the culture, and so they kind of flopped on a lot of things. Even though they're instead of selling this is in the days of CDs when people still sold CDs, and there was no streaming. So instead of selling CDs out of the back of their trucks and stuff and at parties, now it was in stores, but again, the label didn't really understand the culture, so it wasn't really translating. So I started coordinating their release parties, just because I was kind of pretty good at events. I didn't know anything about music, but they were really successful. And then I kind of kept them organized. And so my cousin was like, "You should really be a manager." And I thought, you know what, that sounds fun. I had no idea really what that meant or how much work it would be. So I mean, I didn't manage them. They had a manager, but that was kind of how I earned my stripes. And then I just sort of made a rash decision one time to move, because again, I was in Scotia. I was not happy, and it's just my dad and I. So I didn't really think he'd be supportive of me moving. But one day he was just like, you can keep hitting your head against a brick wall, but all you're going to get is a headache. And I don't know why you don't move. And I was like, oh, thanks. Peace, I'm out of here. And I literally moved, I think 2 months later to make it in the music business in Toronto. And my first job was as an assistant to a booking agent. And to this day, most of my relationships came from that job, just because there was so many people, so much traffic coming in and out of the door. And then the president of what at the time was BMG before they merged with Sony, she really took me under her wing, and she hired me like sort of as an intern, and then I sort of stayed on as an assistant for her. But yeah, I really learned a lot through her because she was one of the only labels that was signing was quote unquote urban talent in Canada at that time. And so even now, like the first artist I signed to my roster was originally signed to BMG through her imprint. So yeah, that's how I got started.
Very cool. And so so you started in booking agent. I understand that because I've definitely done a lot of touring, so I get that world.
Yeah,
and
I hated that.
No, that's fine. I did the same with music PR, so I did not end up sticking to that. So there's a lot of facets to this business. Tell us a little bit about management, just very basics, and how you do what you do. And then in that, what's the biggest misconception about what you do? So like, what do you do? And then what do you find that most people don't understand exactly about what you do?
It's always a hard question to answer because I feel like the answer is everything that needs to get done is what I do. So it varies, like, and my relationship with my clients is different sort of based on their needs. But in general, I would say I'm mostly doing like long-term strategy, like career strategy with my artists. And then like creating the team around them. So whether that's, if we decide to go label route, then it's finding labels. If we're not going the label route and we're going the indie route, then like building a team for us to have success with the independent release. A lot of negotiating, a lot of like contracts. One thing I don't do is I don't do any of the business management. So I don't do any of the accounting. And I always encourage my artists to get a business manager specifically to do, because they're all usually not very good at that either. But for me, I just don't ever want there to be if there's a problem or an error, I don't want to have any issues like with money. So I like to have that separate from what I do. A lot of marketing strategy. In a perfect world, we have a booking agent, but in the early stages, we don't usually have a booking agent. So then I end up doing bookings. In a perfect world, we have PR, but when we're in the early stages, then sometimes I'm also doing that job. I just recently started producing, which I mean is not necessarily the role of a manager, but one of the reasons I started doing it was because I realized as a manager, and maybe this is a misconception, but I'm doing so many things and wearing so many hats, but not getting credit for all of those things because I'm only known as the manager. So when I'm producing something like a video or something like that, I'm not actually getting credited as that. So this year, like with the pandemic and like sort of a lot of things shifting, I was really focusing on kind of claiming credit for myself for the things I'm doing. Like a lot of times I'm doing artistic direction, but I never really knew that's what it was because I was just getting it done for my clients. So yeah, I know there's other things I'm forgetting, but
that's what it sounds like, is like you're doing, at some level, at least at the beginning level, you're kind of the jack of all trades, right? So like you said, like, yeah, if you don't have enough resources to do PR for one album campaign or one tour or something, or booking for one tour right away or something, that kind of falls to you. And then like with the idea that eventually you would be able to like contract that out or something for a campaign, right? So you're like, because when we went a long time without management, and we kind of did that all ourselves. So it feels like, this is all stuff that if someone really gets serious about their own career, this is the stuff that they sort of DIY anyway. But when they get to a certain level, it's like, no, that's something you can actually do. And then when they get to another level, you would then facilitate that with other niche professionals like PR, A&R, producer, music producer. Okay.
Yeah. And then it becomes my job to be on top of what all those team members are doing, and are they doing what we need them to do? Are they doing
the coordination of it all?
Yeah.
All horses
and then
running together.
Being on top of data to know if something's not working, do we need to shift, like course correct? Because the only downside I find with building a team is that, or not building a team, but like having like a publicist or anyone who's only a part of the team for a short amount of time and they just have a bunch of clients, sometimes what they do can be cookie cutter, even if it's not their intention. So it's like important to be on top of certain elements of it. It's okay to be cookie cutter, because if things work, then they work and you don't want to change them. But if there's something that's not connecting, then we need to course correct. And then they're not always the best people to recognize when something's not working.
I noticed that when in music PR too, because there was a lot of cookie cutter, but it was almost like a default setting, because folks would come to us, but not really know what we did or why they needed us. So we'd be like, oh, cool. Yeah, we'll do PR. What are we publicizing? Like, are you on a tour? You got an album? Like, no, we just want to up our profile. So it's like, okay. So at that point, it's like, yeah, you kind of go to your defaults if you don't have strategic goals, right? So is that what you find, that you kind of have to negotiate that?
Yeah, definitely.
That's actually, so that leads to my next question, actually. So, you know, you just mentioned before, maybe artists aren't necessarily the accounting minded or business minded, you know, artist, it's a very different skill set. I said, you know, I would say we're one of a notoriously flaky cohort of people. I know this because I am one. So when you are starting a business relationship with an artist, do you do the approaching or do they approach you? And what do you look for in an artist that you're approaching to let you know that they're ready for a manager? Or like what are you looking for? You know, is it really a diamond in the rough, or is it someone who's done a little bit of this work and is, you know, are there indicators that you see that they need to go to the next level, and that, you know, it might be time for you to step in and that sort of thing?
For the most part, I would say, well, everyone who's on my roster right now has come through a referral. I still think, even when I'm recommending other artists who are looking for management, rather than, I mean, it's totally fine to approach managers yourself as well, but having that referral is like a great buffer to have someone who will actually like listen and go through whatever you send in terms of a package. So that's how I've signed everyone. So I haven't really gone out looking for talent, but that's just really because I don't have my bandwidth is not that large. So what was the second part of your question? Sorry.
Well, just like, what
do I look for in it?
Yeah, like what lets you know, what's another question I have, what impresses you most about an artist? So what are you looking for that lets you know that someone's ready for management? And then what impresses you about an artist? You know, something that makes you say like, yes, I can work with you. This will be productive. This will be a good relationship.
The first thing is their live show. Even though that's a little bit weird right now because we're not doing live shows, but I know that I can sell. If someone has a killer live show, I know how to sell that. I know how to get stakeholders involved by setting up showcases, by doing festival tours, and just by touring. So that is something I know I can sell if they have a really great, I can get people on board. The second thing is, well, maybe I should have said, the first thing is talent. The second thing is their live show. And then the third thing is a little bit harder to pinpoint. It's kind of like like the je ne sais quoi of just having that connection with someone that I like them, like, because you have to spend so much time together. It can't just be like someone you are kind of cool with. Like, you have to really genuinely like this person and want what's best for them, and that also takes time. It doesn't just happen like in one meeting. And then someone who's coachable, so someone who's willing to, knows what they want, but is also willing to like take my advice and try like different things. And what was another thing I would look for? I mean, for me, I look for right now in my career, things I know I can monetize. So like there's certain genres that I don't have a lot of experience in. So I don't have as much interest in looking for an artist in that genre, even though they might be amazing, just because I don't want to have to now go and start from scratch, creating relationships and setting things up. But I mean, anything could happen. I could run into someone tomorrow and that might totally blow me away. And I'd be like, maybe it's worth it to go, I don't know, create a bunch of relationships and start from scratch in country music. I don't know, but for the most part, I try to sign people that are kind of complementary to my roster, like not competing with each other, but when things are happening with one artist, I can, and most of my artists are writers and producers, so I can get them in the studios together. When opportunities come for some that maybe they're too busy to do, I can give them to someone else on my roster. Or if like someone reaches out to me for a show for one artist, I can be like, oh yeah, they're available. And also I have this another amazing artist who'd be great. So things like that I can leverage, or just relationships I have, like in whatever, radio, PR, like from building a team with this artist that I can then, I know people that I can go to with other artists. So those are all things that are important to me.
That's awesome. One thing that, you know, we're in Indianapolis, well, we're in the whole state of Indiana, but, you know, it's kind of a collection of different scenes, sort of, you know, with, you know, smaller to mid-sized cities. And I find that like the biggest challenge in being like a volunteer-driven music org is that we're really looking, I really find myself with this educational series, particularly like just getting people to understand that like they can take, you know, everyone's goals are different with their music, with their art, but just letting people realize that you can do this professionally, you can do this, you know, at a higher level than maybe you've considered. Mm-hmm. Even if you're playing shows, you know, maybe you're only playing shows in your town, and maybe you're starting to saturate the market there, and you haven't really thought about touring. Maybe you're trading shows, you know, a couple hours away or something like that. You know, do you find any other barriers that people put up in their own career that kind of separates them from their career, gets between them and their career, or not? Are there mental hurdles that, you know, you mentioned like coachable people, like is there something, like say they have a really killer live show but they really don't have a lot of experience on the road, is that something that you work with them on, or is that, you know, what other barriers do you find people put up for themselves in their career, or for themselves in taking their career or their music more seriously, professionally, maybe possibly taking it to a more, you know, monetizable level?
Well, I think if someone has a killer live show but they haven't toured, I think all of those things are like coachable, and like if you have a team around you, like those are all things that you can figure out. I think the biggest challenge is for a lot of artists is like comparison and comparing themselves and where they are to other artists, which happens at all levels, whether they're beginner or experienced. But like that can be really hard. Like it's hard for them, and then it can also be hard in terms of managing expectations. So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest struggle, is just people comparing themselves to like other artists that they see and like are where they want to be, or other artists that they would compare themselves to and what they're doing in their career. Yeah, I think that's the biggest. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure if I'm.
Oh, totally. Well, do you ever use that? Do you ever flip that and use that and say like, hey, look, you know, if your goals are like this person, let's use that as a model or something, and say like, hey, you know, if they're doing this or this or this, that's genius, let's, you know? Or do you say like, nah, well, you know, they got to where they are by being themselves, let's find out a more like authentic yourself to kind of like, you know, do what you want to do?
I think it's a bit of both. Like we definitely look at examples like in a way, like in the early stages of like in terms of like creating a strategy. Like are there ideas of what other people are doing that make sense? Or like, for example, if we're touring, I'll look at like who's a similar artist, what venues are they hitting? Like what, like, because sometimes you don't know what makes sense in different markets. It's more around, I would say like streams, like someone will get really down on themselves because, oh well, this artist is getting all these streams and add to all these playlists and I'm not getting them, and why not? And then it's whether it's that something they're internalizing themselves or like blaming on everybody else of like, well, we should be at the same place, we should be getting this. Or same with like something that's a struggle is like awards, like any kind of like where it's, you know, of course you want to be recognized by the industry, and so it can be hard if you're not, or if you don't win, or if you don't get nominated. And then yeah, so it's an ongoing kind of conversation that it's like, what do you call it? Hills and valleys.
Yeah, totally. That makes sense. That makes sense. And some of that, I mean, there's kind of infinite possibility when you're in the arts, but there is kind of a zero-sum game when you're talking about people's attention, right? So awards, someone's got to lose, someone's got to win. So
Yeah.
that sort of makes sense. So okay, that all seems like normal range of healthy human emotions. Here's a true tea sort of moment here, if I may. You can dish as much as you want or generalize as much as you want, but I really want to know, what are some of the red flags for you when dealing with an artist? Like maybe you're considering taking them on, or they've intrigued you at some point, you're into their live show, but like just like on a business level, on an interpersonal level, on like a professionalism level, what are some the red flags you've run into personally, or they're just like, oh yeah, we gotta stop this, we gotta change this, or this is a deal breaker?
Yeah. Well, one I would say is dependability. So like if they're not making meetings or if they're crazy late, like I'm not that much of a stickler for punctuality, but like there's some people who really take it to the next level of like 30 minutes where I'm like, oh, like I'm off and gone, done something else. Yeah, so like dependability. And I think also in the early stages, if you're like being creative and brainstorming and making suggestions and then they're not like doing any of those things, I think that's like kind of feeds into that like dependability and how much do they want it and how much are they willing to kind of look outside of their own like tunnel vision. What else would I say was a red flag? Oh, like expectations, like where they are right now and where they see themselves in like a year. So one example that I can give that I go through with a lot of artists is, I asked them that, it's like, what's the big vision? Like, where do you want to be in general? What's the big vision? And then where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you want to be in a year? And a lot of them will say, I just want to make a living making music. So a year from now, I want to be making a living doing music. So I'm like, okay, well, how much do you make right now? Like how much, what is that number like that you're making right now from your job? And they have a figure. And it's like, okay, so that means obviously there's various revenue streams, but let's just use live shows. That means you have to do this many live shows in a year at this rate. Like how much are you pulling right now? Nothing. That might not be realistic. That you have to do, like, is it realistic that, for example, can you all of a sudden now start charging $1,000, $5,000, whatever that number is? And then is it realistic that you could do 100 gigs like this year, not any year, like maybe year 2, we can build to that. But like right now we're not starting at that. So that's usually a pretty good, like, so for me, the red flag would be someone who doesn't recognize that. Usually the artist will be like, oh, right. Yeah, that makes sense. That's a green flag.
That's great. And then, okay, the flip side of that, because I assume you mentioned your network, you mentioned, the connections you've made in the industry. I'm sure you've made some bad connections. So what are some red flags that you would advise artists in other managers or in seeking management? What are some red flags you see in other managers that maybe aren't, on the up and up?
I think it's kind of the same things, like dependability. And if you're kind of in the beginning of, getting to know each other and working together, like, are they doing the things they say that they're going to be doing? Are they open, like similar, just as much as it's important to be coachable, like, are they also willing to take your ideas and your vision into account, because it's your career at the end of the day and it's your brand and it's you. So that's really important. And then I think it's really important to have values alignment. So actually, I should have mentioned this for myself too, because I do look at that as well. Because sometimes, so for example, if you're, whatever your values are, if like maybe, again, you just want to make a living making music. So you have, your values are in alignment with that. Maybe you have a family, so you can't be on the road 300 days of the year. Then you don't want a manager whose values are like only financial and wants to put you on the road as many, like 365 days of the year to be generating revenue. That's like an extreme example, but So it's important to kind of be on the same page and be going for the same things.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And then just to take it all the way down, like to the nuts and bolts, kind of talked about the very basics of what music management is. Like, for you personally in your career, like, what is your revenue stream? Like, what are your rates? What's the split deal? Like, is it like kind of on a sliding scale based on how much time you can devote, where people are at in their career? You read like How to Make It in the Music Business by Don Passman or something, like some antiquated like relics that are like very helpful, but then like streaming happens, or MP3s happen, and then streaming happens, and now the people are signing 360 deals and talking about the horrors of that. Like, things change so much. Like, what have you found that, like, or what's been your guidestone, like, or your guiding point, like, for your own business, your own career, like, getting yourself revenue?
I think
Is there a percentage?
I think in terms of like commissions, the standard is like 15 to 20%. So 20% on the side of someone who's experienced and 15% for someone who's maybe not as experienced. And then in terms of like things that have changed, I think one thing has changed is that there's more self-managed artists. And so there's more artists that need management services. So, and kind of in the same way how there's like label services where you can pay for a service as opposed to like the commission structure. So, I mean, and there's not like a specific rate for that, but I think that that's kind of where the industry is moving, because like the commission structure was set up because really what managers were doing, we're getting you signed to and getting a big advance. So like there was no other way to pay that for that service. It was like, that was what they did. And then they managed your career after that. But like, that was the big payday, was getting you signed to a label with a big advance. And like, that just doesn't even, I mean, it happens, but like, that's not what the majority of the industry is. So like, that's just not a necessarily even a feasible structure for either party. So like, I think before, where maybe it would be slimy if a manager was charging you, like it would be like, oh no, definitely don't go. Like that would have been a red flag 5 or 10 years ago. Like if a manager's just charging you a rate, then like that's a red flag. Which can still be a red flag, so it's a bit tricky. But like if you have very clear, like that they're providing a specific service and there's benchmarks and you have a contract that like, okay, this is what I need you specifically to do this thing, then I think it's fine for there to be I just think that's the way the industry is moving, because otherwise there is never any revenue for the work that's being done. So it's becoming like a part, not no revenue, but it's not in the same model as like some big cushy advance.
But with those, like with management services, that's usually coming from an artist who has a specific goal that they want to help, them achieve. So they're already at the point where they're like, maybe they need help strategizing, but they at least have a goal and they at least have something there. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so then if we can pick your brain just a little bit in a general sense. So 1 year of the pandemic down, some things are ramping back up. We're half vax now. And we did a pretty socially distanced outdoor concert for the NCAA here recently.
Okay.
And that went well.
Oh, right. I think you mentioned that. Cool.
Yeah, everyone was far away from us and we were far away from them, and there was a good breeze. It was nice outside. We lucked out. And felt pretty safe about that. But it still feels like the Wild West, and who knows when people are making tour plans right now with vaccine rollouts, but who knows what direction this is actually going to take. What have been some of the strategies? How have you pivoted? And what have been some of the strategies you deployed this last year, with so much of the music industry and tour industry grounded? And does it just mean beefier digital releases? What do you see for the foreseeable future? What have you tried?
I giggled when you said pivot, because I was on a panel last week and we had to pay $1 for every time someone said pivot. That's the
word. Exactly. Everyone, I don't care what industry you're in, you're saying pivot too much.
So how did we pivot? No, I mean, we're not making any touring plans right now, just because I think we are not in a place where, like, we are having an announcement tomorrow if we're going back into lockdown, and we've only been out of lockdown for a week. So, and like we're not anywhere near where you guys are in terms of vaccinations. And for us, touring, really, a lot of it happens outside of Canada. So like, we're not kind of, I just feel like there's been so many like starts and stops that I'm just like, no, we're not doing this thing. Like, no, we'll plan this when it really is realistic. But one of the things we did do in the pandemic was we didn't stop releasing music. So in the beginning of the pandemic, it was like a question of, well, do we release? Like, is it a point of releasing when we can't tour or we can't do shows? But all of my artists, we just kept on with release plans. And some of them, actually, we increased our releases. And then we had pockets of time where we were able to shoot content. And then that was one area, like in Canada, or at least in Ontario, that didn't shut down. So even when we were in like our strictest lockdown, we could still shoot. So we did a ton of content. We created a lot of content just because that was one thing we were allowed to do. Like, studios were closed, but we could go and shoot. It was allowed. So, and then we also really started focusing on music sync. That's what, actually, in the beginning of the pandemic, that's what I was doing almost like all day, because I did not know where revenue was coming from. And then brand partnerships, because again, we were sort of like, I didn't even know if brands were going to have budgets, because like the brand partnerships we had set up around like between March and May of last year all like just fell to the wayside with the pandemic. So then I'm like, oh my gosh, where is the money? Like, no one has it. Everyone's like in the same boat, but brands just sort of shifted and pivoted and like just made smaller campaigns. So for us, it actually increased our ability to get like smaller campaigns than like things that would have been unreachable for us if they were working with like big budgets and trying to get like the Beyoncés. So yeah, so mostly we did brand partnerships, music sync, and then like releasing a lot of music and content.
That's awesome. Was that a lot of, because I mean, sync is like the big thing. I mean, we've been trying to do it for years, but you know, if you know anything about our music, it's very niche and weird. You know, the partnerships have to be very specific. So yeah, it's cool to see that you're talking like on a more micro level, but I guess not even that, like just digital rather than like a whole national campaign, right? Or some like, you know, national ad.
Well, I think it's mostly with like film and television.
Right.
And I think part of the reason was because in the beginning of the pandemic, everyone, like no one knew anything. It was the Wild Wild West, and like everyone was just on Zooms. So like everyone was really accessible. So like the Guild of Music Supervisors were just doing Zooms with music supervisors that just like this, that you could hop on, talk to people. Like there would be like a talk like this, then a Q&A, but like people were like sharing their information. So I think everyone that kind of participated in that in the first couple months, like, cause I was just doing it because I had the time and I just didn't want to like lose my mind of just stressing over the fact of what the fuck, like, so I was like, yeah, I'll get on another Zoom with these people. Why not? Sorry, I should have probably asked before this about language.
Totally fine. It's totally fine. If it's an issue, I'll make a really funny bleep, but I like it. So just
okay, perfect. I was like, whoop, too late now. So yeah, so like a lot of those, I mean, I just was able to, I had some sync relationships before, but I was able to kind of expand my network there. And then also, which was kind of a funny thing that happened during the pandemic, is right before the pandemic started, I was part of this collective called Key Change. So it's a collective based in Europe of women and gender minorities, and the whole purpose of it is to like restructure the music industry, aiming for a gender balance. So we had just had our meetup in Sweden in like the end of February, like basically 2 weeks before the whole world went to shit. So like we met there, and the purpose of Key Change is like festivals sign up and they sign up for a pledge to like where they're working towards a gender balance, whether it's on stage or off, like behind the scenes, and it can be organizations and companies as well. So what they do is they select 70, I think there's 74 of us. So half of us are what they call innovators, which are like executives, and then the other half are artists. And then they place all the art, like, so all the artists get showcases at 2 to 3 major festivals internationally, like Reeperbahn, Great Escape, Liverpool Sound City, a bunch of festivals across a variety of genres. And then the same thing for the innovators, like we get booked as panelists and like doing workshops and stuff at these festivals. So none of that happened. But what did happen was like we were really able to like maintain our connections through Zoom, which I think in some ways, because of the pandemic, our network is stronger, because otherwise we probably would never have talked, and we just would have run into each other at whatever 2 festivals we went to, which would still have been fun, but not the same as like at the beginning of the pandemic. There was a woman in Spain who does like therapy specifically to people in the music industry. So she was doing Zooms every week. And then we had webinars like with different entities like SoundCloud, Song Trust, a bunch of different organizations. So like we were meeting with each other at least once a month. So I think in some ways just nurturing those relationships, was like a benefit of like kind of what came out of the last year.
That's rad. The other question I was going to say was, I mean, other than that being totally derailed, but I'm glad that you pivoted. Okay, so you talked about sync. I guess this might answer that question. Like, being where we are, does anything really replace touring in an artist's career? Do you have artists that don't tour at all and that can make it work? I feel like knowing our own career trajectory, we were pretty much made by touring, you know, at a DIY, and then later at like a, you know, more agent-based level. Do you have artists that, you know, didn't, I mean, we're always kind of focused on streams and syncs, and or has it always been an all of the above approach, or do you see anything replacing touring, or are we just kind of like, you know, looking towards syncs and that sort of thing in the foreseeable?
I mean, I think it's really hard to replace touring in terms of like building your fan base. And then certainly with regards to revenue, but I think it depends on the genre. So I think, for example, if you're in EDM, I don't think it's as important it's not as urgent as if you're like an indie rock band or like a soul musician. Just because EDM, they're still able to make some pretty good money off streams because it's a streaming genre. Well, I guess it depends even within EDM anyways, I think it depends on genre.
That totally makes sense. So let's see. That's a big thing though. So like I said, we've been trying to break into like the sync world forever. Do you think that's a big selling point for getting a manager? Like, is that a good reason to like, you know, for an artist to be like, you know what? I am leaving a lot of money on the table. I'm leaving a lot of opportunity on the table. Is a manager really like one of the key ways of like that high level strategic thinking or networking, or, you know, is that kind of necessary? Like, do you find that you have more keys to that kingdom of music supervisors than like a DIY artist would?
Well, I think definitely more than a DIY artist would, but I don't know that all managers have, like, I think it would be important to kind of, if a manager was saying they could do that for you, that you'd want to see a track record of their success. Because I know even labels will say that.
Right.
And then it's like, okay, well, great. What syncs have you gotten? Well, we haven't gotten any yet, but we have a department. It's like, okay.
But that's a good thing to put on a artist list in vetting any prospective management then, if that's their goal.
Well, just with in terms of anything that they're saying that they are at, like, what is their track record of doing it?
Right.
Yeah, because I don't think that there's like some managers who do it well for sure, and then there's like others who I just don't think are ever doing it.
Yeah.
But in terms of leaving money on the table, I think probably most artists are leaving their publishing money on the table.
Yes.
And
I was going to ask, what are some of the revenue streams most artists are missing? That was my next question. So that sounds like a perfect example. So in that, you're let folks know, that's BMI, that's ASCAP, that's who else? Who are the other publishers?
Well, there's a variety of things. Like I think, so there's your songwriting money, like there's your performance revenue. If you're a producer, you're also collecting that revenue. If you're if you're signed up to a performing rights society, they're collecting your performance rights, obviously. If you're signed up for Sound Exchange, you're collecting your record royalties. But if you don't have your own publishing company, or if you're not signed up with a publishing administration company, then you're not collecting your publishing money. So there's like entities like Song Trust. I think SoundCloud might be doing it now. There's a variety of companies that's all they do, is they just make sure that you're collecting that, because it's just money that's sitting there. Like, because you can't collect the publishing portion as an artist. And if you don't have a publisher, they're not collecting it. So you either have to set up a publishing company to collect it, or you sign up for like I said, with a Song Trust that collects that, but it is also making sure that you're getting all of the rights in other markets. Because one thing I have found, especially with like sync placements, so I have someone I work with in the UK who pitches our stuff. She pitches it in the UK and in the US, but to pitch anything in the UK, it has to have a PRS code. And I have found every time I go into PRS, so in Canada, our performing rights organization is Socan, which would be like your BMI or ASCAP. So they should be that. The way it's supposed to work is that all of that information should be at PRS, and like everything, they should be collecting everything everywhere. That's just not what happens. And like every time I go into PRS, there's to look up the PRS codes, there's always, I would say on average, half of the songs aren't there. Sometimes it might just be a handful, but on average, it's 50% of the songs aren't there. And we can't get placements without those codes, which means that SoCan isn't doing everything in different markets, because they're just focusing on their own, because they'll all say that that's what they do, but they don't really do it.
Yeah, and that's hard. That's a hard thing to learn, because no one really. I always tell people, hand in hand with getting artists to recognize that they can take their music to a more professional level, is to realize that there is actually a map for this, but you don't know how to find it. So everyone ends up reinventing the wheel. We were actually on tour with Electric Six in the UK when we got the PRS tip there, because we had to fill out the form every night for what we were performing for publishing. So that was just extra money that we wouldn't have known about, And the same with ASCAP, but we were a little more on top of it with ASCAP. But when you go international, you don't think about that sort of thing.
And any of that money that's not collected, it expires. I don't remember what the exact time frame is. It might be 3 years, but don't quote me. It might be 5. I don't remember. But it's there's a finite amount of time that you have to claim it, and when you don't claim it, it just goes to the biggest artists, which is the most backwards thing. It's like the people who need it the least get the money that no one has claimed, but they just split it amongst the biggest. Yeah. Clients.
That's strange. These are truly the annals of the music industry. You're like, what? Yeah. We're getting in the mud. But yeah, so that's good to be on top of that. And so you said Song Trust. I'll pick your brain for more of the links.
For anyone who's just interested in having a breakdown of publishing in a way that's understandable, if you go to the Song Trust website, they have a little publishing 101 video.
Cool.
I think you might have to give them your email or something, but it's worthwhile. They make it very simple of what all the rights are and who collects what. And when they talk about this, I think in that video about the black hole of
unclaimed money,
not claimed. Yeah.
We'll link it up in the YouTube description when we put it up. So that's okay. So you kind of mentioned at the very essence of what you do, you wear a lot of hats, right? So music video producer, you said you did kind of add that to your list this year, maybe before. So that's one thing. We talked about revenue streams, talked about monetizable. You talked about content creation and sync during the pandemic, but I assume it's got to be, mega important anytime.
Yeah.
We actually have some great music video talent here in Indiana. What do you see as the place of the music video in the industry now? And what's some other content that's music related that might not qualify as a music video that maybe people aren't taking advantage of, or aren't thinking in that mode? Like what are some outside the box,
Thinking?
yeah,
Yeah.
for
Well, I
video
think
and
video
music
content.
creation.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
I think
yeah. So
I think video content is crucial. Like, I think it's imperative for anything you're releasing. But I think what's changed is it no longer has to be like a super expensive, fancy storyline. Like, and then again, it depends on genre. Like, if you're an EDM, it's probably gonna just be a bunch of graphics moving, like super simple and with lots of color. It can be something creative, like in other genres, but I think it's just important to have some kind of video content to go along with the music, because you don't want to be missing out on everything that's happening on YouTube, and you also don't necessarily want to just have the artwork up there. Like, I know that people do that for and placement of not having anything, but I think it is better to have something. And I know visualizers are becoming more popular, so I've done that with some of my artists when like a big budget isn't like when we don't have a huge budget, and it's like, oh, you can just create a loop of something that's creative and cool for a visualizer. And then I think it's also becoming more popular to have like just live performance video, like anything like the Mahogany sessions and the Fender sessions and stuff like that. So it's content that's not super expensive to shoot, and I think that also builds like that emotional connection with your audience. But like for some artists, it's important to do something really creative, like if that's part of your brand. So I'm not saying that music videos are not important. I just think there's a lot of different ways that you can create content to go along with music. With the one of my artists wrote a song about love called Good Love, and so we shot a short documentary where we just interviewed people from like a 4-year-old to an 84-year-old about love. So it was not a traditional music video, but it was just something that the song's playing in the background, but like it was really a piece of content that like where the hope anyways was it would reach a wide variety of people, and then that would expose them to the song, as opposed to just having like a narrative based on song.
I was going to ask you about that next, actually, because it's interesting to like, who would even think of like, we were just talking about sync, but hey, you shot your own like mini documentary and synced the song
it was
with
super
it.
affordable for us to do that.
Yeah.
Like it was under $1,000.
And you did it during the pandemic, right? Like that was like, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll link up we'll link up all your current projects in the YouTube description too, because they're really cool. TiKA and Kayla Diamond. What else do you have going on right now?
TiKA, Kayla Diamond, Gary Beals is the one we did the Good Love video with. And then I have another artist who I signed him as like, was like the first artist that I signed to my roster, named Shawn Desman. And so he's a pop artist and his best friend is a country artist. So they got together and formed a duo called Radio Club, and they basically like produce and write all the songs and then have different people sing them. So they are dropping a single on April 9th. So like for them, that's a perfect example. Like we don't shoot video in the like music videos in the way that like his best friend's in Nashville, he's in Toronto, like getting them together would be, and then like it's not them singing it. Like sometimes it's them singing it, but sometimes it's a featured artist. So I mean, it's just graphics in terms of video.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Like creative, I mean, you would think musicians are musicians, but we are, if we're flaky, we're also a creative lot. So you'd think that, that seems like the really big fun of what you do is to like kind of like harness their creativity in other ways and use your own to kind of come up with these interesting strategies where, how do you negotiate a pandemic? Well, thank you for being with us today. We're going to open up the floor for questions.
Okay.
That's cool. Does anyone have a question for Kat? I'll just unmute folks. Go ahead, Adam. Adam 2.
Hi, Kat. Thank you so much for being here. Everything, all the content from this call has been fantastic. I wish I could take the entire music production cohort from Ball State and get them onto this call. There's just been so many gems that you just dropped, and it's all been great. I had one question in particular, and this question's kind of specific to the aspiring music professional that's coming out of college.
Mm-hmm.
And it relates to DIY record labels. And as somebody who has interacted with plenty of record labels such as yourself, I'm sure you'd have some insight to provide for sure. But as an independent artist who is looking to potentially sign with maybe a DIY record label who's just starting out, there seems to be a couple potential pitfalls with as we were talking about publishing earlier, with signing away that publishing to somebody who maybe it's not so much worth giving 50% of those publishing revenue streams to. So just wanted to get an idea if besides that, what are some other pitfalls that you see with DIY record labels that are just starting out, just things to look out for from an artist's perspective?
I think I don't know if it's a pitfall, but the questions I'd be asking is what value are they bringing to the table and what is it worth? So, because if they're DIY themselves and not, I mean, because there's lots of independents that could be established, but if they're DIY themselves, like what are their connections? Like, are you guys both kind of in the same boat, just trying to grind it out, or have they actually done this before? Is it like just a matter of them putting it through DistroKid as opposed to you putting it through DistroKid, or like, do they have a distribution strategy in place? Like, do they have something set up with the Orchard or Symphonic or whoever? So I think it's really important to like put a value on what they're bringing to the table. So, and maybe what they're bringing to the table is just that now you have more than just yourself to put out your project, which is fine, but then you shouldn't be giving away necessarily 50% of like your master ownership. And I would not give away any of your publishing.
Good question, Adam F. Any other questions about anything we talked about? Yeah.
Sorry, I wanted to just tag on to that other thing. I also wouldn't give for like a DIY label. I also wouldn't give up any of the tour revenue, because usually what a label will want to come and take, if ideally in a perfect world, you only want to be giving up the record, like not giving up, sharing. You want to have like a share. Maybe it's 50-50, maybe it's 50-50 of just the record royalties. Like none of the other ancillary revenues, like not touring, not merch, not publishing.
Cool. Adam, first Adam, did you also have a question?
Yes, please. Thank you for the meeting tonight. That was very informative. I really appreciate it. I've been an independent musician for a long time, and I've just been kind of doing things on my own due to the pandemic and not really doing things with the band. So you mentioned like brand partnership. Mm-hmm. Now, is that like having songs used in commercials and that kind of thing, or I guess how does one get into that sort of thing, I guess?
So so having music in a commercial would be music synchronization. And then a brand partnership is more like the type of brand partnerships we've been doing have been like Doritos was doing a contest, and so they're almost like influencer campaigns, but they see artists as influencers. So there's ways to create content that's in alignment with what a brand might be doing. So they're not always as big as like Doritos. We've done some with like a local wine company in Canada, in Ontario specifically, called Bodacious Wine, and they just wanted the people to feel like this is a fun wine. So they had fun people like shooting content, not even drinking the wine, but just like, yeah, just to like promote it itself. So like basically they're the brand that is presenting the content. And then the best way to like start those relationships is going to agencies, so marketing agencies, because most anyone who's doing a campaign, any brand, is doing it through an agency. So they're probably signing with an agency, and then an agency is creating their marketing strategy. And within that marketing strategy, they might have an influencer campaign. So they would be the ones who would be looking for artists and other influential people that they then pay to create content in alignment with the brands on their roster. So the best thing to do is to create those relationships. It's really not with the brands, unless it's like a mom and pop shop, but then they probably don't have the budget.
So it's kind of like with the music supervisors for sync, for TV, film, and commercial. You're almost like going to a marketing agent for as a music, almost as they're the music supervisor too, to present yourself as a resource for them, right? Like, hey, this is my music that we would be open to partnering with, company XYZ, just like a music supervisor would partner or place your music in a film or TV or something like that, right?
Yeah. And I mean, and I would start with the agencies in like domestically that are in your area that probably have all of the like companies within your city. Like the bigger companies that are within your city are probably with a certain agency, as opposed to like, I wouldn't necessarily target like, I don't know, Ford Motors or something off the top. Like there might be agencies that have those big clients, but whoever has because anyone who has a local company, when they do a campaign, they're probably also looking for local talent. Like it will be specific that they want to feature local talent. So I had another client in Rochester, New York, and the ESL there, I don't know, do you have ESL? And it's a bank. Anyways, maybe it's just in the East Coast. Actually, yeah, I think might only be in New York State. But they did a campaign, and so they specifically wanted Rochester artists, so I wouldn't have even been able to pitch anyone else on my roster for that. And again, same thing for my Ontario artists, when they were doing Bodacious Wines, like they specifically wanted Ontario artists. And then if you are setting up those meetings, it'd be important for you to know like all your social stats. So it won't only be about the music. Like there'll be a couple of things they might be interested in. One will be that you're an artist, so you already have fans, like an engaged fans. You probably have like not just like another person on Instagram who might have followers that are not necessarily engaged. And it doesn't matter if it's not like a ton. You can be considered what they would call like a micro influencer, which is anyone under 10,000 followers. So knowing that information, and then if there's anything like in terms of like your brand, that's like, what does your brand look and feel like creatively? Because you'll need to have some overlap in terms of who they're trying to reach, and then that selling to them that you're reaching that same audience. Does that make sense? Or am I confusing, making it more confusing?
No, that's great.
That was great. Thank you.
Cool.
Awesome. Any other questions? Cool. Well, thanks again, Kat. This has been awesome. There's anything else anything else you want to talk about? I know you've done like one-on-one sessions with artists before. Anything else you want to talk about your services, or what you do, or if you want me to link anything up, we can always tell me later too for the YouTube channel. But
sure. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else. I mean, I do one-on-ones. What else do I do? I mean, I do usually have courses running, but I'm revamping the content right now just because I I have a release strategy course, but like release strategies are always changing and evolving.
Yep.
So I have to update the content.
Well, let us know. We'll definitely link those up on the MFT website and socials too, because that'll be great for follow-up. Cool. Well,
Cool.
thanks again. Thank you everyone for joining us.
No problem.
Again, we'll put this up on the Musical Family Tree channel shortly. But for now, have a good evening.
Awesome.
There.
Thanks.
Thanks,
for
Kat.
having me.